Let's talk about Abraham. So there's this guy who's born in Mesopotamia. His name is Abram. And then after he does a bunch of super cool things, amongst them enter into a covenant with God, he gets called Abraham. Abraham, the father of nations, gives birth to a son, who gives birth to a son, son, who are amongst his descendants none other than Moses and Jesus and Muhammad. So let's talk about these other three guys. Each one of them is a prophet who speaks to the Lord and who there is a religion because of. There is a religion because of Moses, that's Judaism. The one because of Jesus is Christianity. The one because of Muhammad is Islam. All three of those are Abrahamic faiths. What that means is that the three religions go back to Abraham. Abraham is the core of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all monotheistic religions. That means that they all believe in one God and only one God. They are also Abrahamic faiths. That means that Abraham, literally the guy, is the core or the kernel that leads to those three religions. So here's a few stories about Abraham. Abraham and his wife Sarah are having trouble conceiving, and Abraham really wants to have a male offspring, or offspring nonetheless. Well, everyone agrees that it's okay for Abraham to have relations with Hagar, who works for Sarah. They immediately have a kid. It's a son, and they name him Ishmael. Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn male son. And Muhammad, the prophet who gives us Islam, is the descendant of Ishmael. After Abraham and Hagar have Ishmael, Abraham and Sarah, who's his actual wife, finally have a kid. And it's a boy, and they name him Isaac. Isaac is Abraham's first legitimate son, the son who was born in wedlock. Isaac is the ancestor of first Moses and later Jesus. In the Christian Bible, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament starts with a story about Jesus of Nazareth, and we're told that Jesus has as his ancestor, King David, Judah, go back, Isaac, go back to Abraham. And the Quran tells us that Muhammad is the descendant of Ishmael, who is the descendant of Abraham. So we've got these three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they share a ancestor, and that's Abraham. Now here's some other cool stories about how Abram turned into Abraham, the father of nations. First of all, he's in Mesopotamia, in a village called Ur, and he hears God say, Abram, get your stuff and go to a land where I will show you. And who would just go? Well, Abram would. He takes his wife Sarah. Sarah turns into Sarah when Abram turns into Abraham. So God changes both of their names. So Abram grabs Sarah and his nephew Lot, who becomes later important, and a bunch of other people who follow Abram, and they just start going into the desert. It's a sign of his faith. God tells him to go, so he goes. Later on, I was trying to hold this one up. Later on, God says, take your beloved son Isaac and have him be a burnt offering for me. And what does Abraham do? He grabs Isaac and they hit the road. First, Abraham makes a little fireplace, then he binds up his son's legs, presumably with a rope, and then he takes up a knife. He's about to kill Isaac, but then at the same time, we see a ram, and we see God coming in and telling Abraham, hey, thanks for being willing, but you don't have to kill Isaac. Super faithful. Abraham was willing to do anything to please God. Another story is when he almost sacrifices his wife, Sarah, who he loves. They are somewhere between Syria and Egypt walking around, and finally they make their way to the pyramids. Picture the Pharaoh coming in, seeing these strangers, and saying, I want that woman. Well, Abraham knows that if he says, that's my wife, you can't have her, they'll just kill him and take his possessions like his wife. So instead he says, oh, this is my sister. And then they're like, oh, and they trust him and they give him things and they praise him, they respect him, they show him a good time because they want his blessing so that the Pharaoh can have Sarah. He gives up Sarah. He says, okay, you can have her. Again, just like God comes through with the ram so he doesn't have to kill Isaac, God comes through and puts it in the Pharaoh's heart not to take Sarah. And Pharaoh sends Sarah and Abraham on their way and a bunch of other goods that they didn't have. So great, Abraham was willing to do whatever God was asking him to do. God also says you need to circumcise your males on the 8th day of their life. And so that's what Abraham does. Not just the males that are born into the family, but even if you buy a worker, a slave, property, the males have to be circumcised.